Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. The appointed hour for the Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee has now come and gone, and we are going to hereby call this meeting to order. I'm going to ask Danny Mathis if he would lead us in a word of prayer, please.
Pray. Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for the members that are here on this committee. We thank you for the folks that are here. Father, help us to do everything in obedience to you, that we will do what's right for the state of Georgia and keep this place safe. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay. First bill that we're going to hear is going to be House Bill 925. Representative Saines. You want to go down there? Be good. You can go down to the table. Right. Y'all pardon Chairman Petrie. He's going to partake of a little lunch today. As long as he doesn't chew loud, we're going to allow that.
Is it all right if Taylor with the frontline policy?
Absolutely. Taylor, come on. We'd be offended if you didn't come down and speak to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And frontline policy has helped tremendously when a couple pastors and a few groups came to me with this legislation, and I am presenting, as the chairman stated, 925 LC 44252. It was made clear during the COVID pandemic that there was some confusion with certain churches whether or not it was reality that they were unsure if they could assemble their congregation and the risk or liability that took. So this policy is pretty simple. It purely looks to clarify that institutions of worship have a special place in our code in terms of their ability to come together and congregate and practice their faith in that setting. That's kind of the intention of the policy, and I'll let the committee kind of direct where in terms of the legislation they would like to get added information on. Taylor, do you have any information you'd like to highlight?
I would like to highlight that this bill has been passed in 22 other states, has not experienced any significant challenge. It's pretty standard First Amendment territory to protect the freedom of religious assemblies, and granting them sort of most favored status just ensures that if there are any exemptions provided by either local governments or state governments under these states of emergencies, that those would apply to religious assemblies as well, to ensure that they are not unfairly discriminated against. So it's just an added level of protection, and those apply regardless of which religion we're talking about, which individuals we're talking about as well.
And nobody forces you to go to church. That's
correct.
Something you do of your own free will.
Yes, sir.
Any questions? Let's see. Representative Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you for bringing this bill. So I just wanted you to walk me through what would be different for a church now than it was during COVID. Like if a church was concerned that they thought that the order, just go ahead and tell me what's different from what they had in COVID, and what will this do for them? Just kind of lay that out for me.
Absolutely. So what we saw around the country was various local and state governments who did not have this legislation enacted to protect them saw circumstances where there might be other institutions or other businesses that were allowed a protected status. They were allowed an exemption from a state of emergency, but for non-clarified reasons, religious assemblies were not. And there were essentially two standards operating. You say like package stores, for instance, could be open, convenience stores could be open and allow up to 25 people inside, but religious institutions in some areas could not. So what this would do is just clarify that under those states of emergency, if there is a temporary lockdown policy enacted or something like that, any exemption that is promulgated either at the local or state level, that would apply to a church as well. So a church can say, okay, we see that there was an exemption granted to our local convenience stores, we know that that would apply to us as well. We can stay open, we can do, X, Y, or Z to meet that exemption criteria. Does that make sense?
I'm remembering back to those, that horrible first spring when we were like closed for 3 weeks, and then Governor Kemp said we can open, and he listed like what would open back up. Do y'all remember that? I remember we got a little bit of grief about the tattoo parlors or whatever, but there was a lot of other stuff there. And so if we pass this law, he wouldn't have to, the next governor wouldn't have to say anything about religious assemblies because they would already be included, or would they still need to be listed if they were exempted?
I think in terms of clarity, I don't think it would be anything to not, including them wouldn't modify that their ability to have most favored status, but whether that be a local government that has the authority in a future circumstance that may or may not, this clarifies that they would be, if there's any exemption for any entity, they would be included in there. I would assume that at least our current status is that they would go ahead and on a statewide level add that on there, but it just again clarifies that if there is an entity that is exempted from that limitation of gathering, churches, faith-based institutions of all kind, a church for me, a synagogue for someone else, all those faith-based institutions would be included in that rule.
Chairman Petrie, you have a comment? Oh,
are you enjoying your meal?
Representative Lott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say, and just for those that cannot remember, but we were fortunate in Georgia that the governor did not actually close down our religious institutions, but in other states, as you stated, that did happen. And we don't know moment to moment whose idea, may take that over. So I absolutely appreciate the bill, and Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion.
Yeah, I think, hold on just one second. I got one more here. Representative Holcomb, you have.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Who could they sue under subsection B?
So if that would apply if a local jurisdiction or any state government entity tried to countermand this law and say, well, we see that law, but we're just going to apply a restriction regardless and say that you are not exempted under another exemption we've offered. If that were to be the case, then the religious institution could say, we have this protection, which gives us ground to sue to protect our most favored status, if that makes sense.
It does. So who specifically would they sue?
It would be the entity, the government, whichever government entity were applying that force.
Okay. So either city, county, or the state government, the
Yes,
governor.
And that would be in the way that, in terms of burden impaired or violated, it would have to be an enforcement action of that local or whatever level of government. It wouldn't be, again, not including in the text wouldn't apply, but if a government intentionally ignored the efforts of that law, that's when it would be applied. And I think several constituents, including I think there's times where telecommunication has made all our lives better. And I know most pastors, most institutions of worship allowed that, but there are certain instances, receiving the Eucharist, for example, breaking bread, as my friend is exhibiting use of, is something that you have to physically be present for. And I think it's a significant reason to put them in a most favored status and ensure that there is some mechanism of remedy if that violation does occur.
We have numerous people that are signed up to speak to this bill, and I'm going to allow you to come down and just speak briefly. I believe there's going to be the overwhelming support of this committee to move this bill through. So those who want to speak, if you would come and speak briefly, I have Wes Cantrell. That'll be fine, sir, please.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity to be here. Good to see so many familiar faces. I come to you today as a current pastor, a former legislator. I'm the associate pastor of administration at the First Baptist Church in Woodstock, one of the largest churches in our state. And it seems, kind of a no-brainer. Why in Georgia do we need to have a law like this? But we saw in other states where it became a real issue, where local municipalities or even a governor might shut down places of worship. I just don't think the government should be in the business of shutting down churches, synagogues, mosques. It's like you said earlier, Mr. Chairman, it's not mandatory attendance. I wish we could make people attend, trust me. But it is voluntary attendance. So if someone doesn't feel like they should attend for a concern that they have, they don't have to come. But the government shouldn't be in the business of telling people that they can't exercise their First Amendment rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's that say that? Matt Parnell?
Yes, hey,
There
how
you
are
go.
you doing? Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Representative Sane, thank you so much for your leadership in this. And first of all, I want to thank Governor Kemp, like Representative Lott pointed out, his leadership during COVID was exemplary. He was the best governor. He might not have gotten all the headlines, but his leadership in so many ways was absolutely incredible. But that's not actually what we're talking about here. We're talking about municipalities. We're talking about things we saw, unbelievable things that we saw in other states infringing on our First Amendment right to religious freedom. It's enshrined in our Constitution. This is a straightforward bill. The Georgia Faith and Freedom Coalition, of course, supports this, and we're honored to stand alongside the representative and so many others in this room. God bless y'all. Thank you.
Okay, Pastor Scott McGinnis. Is that right?
Thank you, Chairman Collins and members of the committee. And thank you, Representative Saines, for sponsoring HB 925. My name is Scott McInnes, and I serve as the director of Church Ambassador Network. And I've been a pastor for the last 25 years. And the church is a place of comfort during times of trouble. And it's a place where some of our greatest joys occur. Baptisms, weddings, funeral, grief, joy, all in our churches. And it's where we can go to the altar and lay down our burdens. It's where many of us go to find strength to keep going when times get tough. And that haven of hope and healing was shut down during one of the toughest times in our lifetime, the COVID pandemic. And not only did the lockdowns rob Christians of the house that they run to in times of trouble, but they also brought harm to the churches as well. There are many churches in my community that struggled. Our church, Crossroads Church in Noonan, Georgia, it's a fairly large church, and we were seeing significant growth and people coming to the Lord and baptisms, and that momentum was kind of shut down during that time for sure. It was a huge setback that took more than a year to recover from that and get back to where we originally were before the pandemic. We were fortunate because several churches in our area had to close their doors forever. There were also a great tension that was created. Most churches wanted to honor the government, but there came a point where people felt like they had to choose between God and government. David Franklin, an associational leader in North Georgia, told me that churches around him felt burned a little bit by the government, that trust had been lost. And he emphasized that African-American church pastors were telling him that they stayed shut down way too long and they had been adversely affected disproportionately by the lockdown. The frustrating part for many pastors was that while the churches were being asked to not assemble or assemble in a certain way, or the government allowed retail and entertainment establishments the freedom to remain open and operate. Now, our state, comparatively, was amazing. Many states were locking down churches for much longer times, trying to lock up pastors for meeting and waging what looked like a war on a church. And we are grateful for the executive leadership that we have here. But with that experience that we now have behind us, it's important to understand that we will not always have the same governor in place during a time of crisis. And so HB 925 would ensure that in any future state of emergency, houses of worship are treated in the same way that other establishments are. This bill would ensure that the government cannot discriminate against or close a place of worship during an emergency, so long as other secular institutions are allowed to continue operating. Now, while in Georgia, we are confident in the current executive leadership in the state, we don't always know what the future may hold. So I'm asking that you vote yes to both prevent future abuses of executive power and protect Georgians with their right to worship as they see fit. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor, for being with us here. Mike Griffin. You want to act like you're a Methodist now instead of a Baptist.
I don't know. I try to say so. My best friends are Methodists. Anyway, my name is Mike Griffin. I'm the public affairs representative here with the Georgia Baptist Mission Board, and we do support the representative here in this legislation today. Georgia Baptist, back in 2020, I think they said that there was like 1.5 million Southern Baptists in our state. We have about 3,400 churches. And I pastored for 35 and a half straight years here in our state, been down here 17 years. We do support this legislation. I literally got a text from one of the governor's staff that I could say this to y'all. And that is that the governor told his staff, basically, I didn't open the churches in the state of Georgia and I'll not be the one to close them.
Man.
And while the governor did meet online with pastors, I was there on one of the online sessions with him. He did recommend, please do this, this. You may want to not meet for 2 weeks, blah, blah. But he never was going to shut it down. But you know what? It's not King Kemp. He was Governor Kemp. So he's not going to be here forever.
Right.
So we don't know who the next governor is going to be. And I think this kind of insurance that we have this passed to make sure that going forward, we won't have to have that. But we're so thankful because I know this sounds like I'm being political, but I think Governor Kemp's the best governor we ever had. And I appreciate him standing on religious liberty and these issues, especially during the pandemic, was extremely hard on he and his family, but yet he continued to stand up. And we had places where I had heard that, casinos could have 50% present, but a church could only have 50 people present.
Right.
And so I think this kind of legislation will be very helpful to our people here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, we have Pastor Chris Sanchez.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Representative Sains, thank you all for offering us a few minutes of your time to speak this afternoon rather. My name is Dr. Chris Sanchez. I am the Director of Operations for Frontline Policy. I've been serving in Georgia Baptist churches for 25 years, and I've been a pastor for the last 8 years. In times of uncertainty and crisis, such as a pandemic, the role of religious assemblies becomes even more important and more critical. They offer solace and hope and a sense of calm, not only to people of faith, but to the community at large. It's during these challenging moments that the faithful seek guidance, comfort, and support through our spiritual practices and our congregations. Protections for the right of religious assembly, even in states of emergency, are essential. This isn't about privileging religious activities over others, but about recognizing the unique role they play in the lives of believers and in the fabric of our society. Moreover, protecting religious assemblies in states of emergency sends a powerful message about the value of spiritual well-being as a part of a holistic approach to public health. It acknowledges mental, emotional, and spiritual health, that these things are deeply interconnected, and that for many, religious gatherings are vital to their well-being. Scripture underscores the importance of coming together in worship. Hebrews 10, 24 and 25 exhorts us not to forsake the assembling together. Matthew 18, 20 says, for 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there with them. And that reminds us of the divine presence in our assemblies when we gather. These verses highlight the dual importance of religious assemblies, mutual encouragement in faith, and as spaces where the presence of God is manifestly expressed. This bill is a call to recognize the essential nature of religious institutions and their practice, especially in times of crisis, and to ensure that such practices can continue in a manner that is safe and respectful to the challenges posed by the emergencies like a pandemic. Thank you. May God bless you.
Thank you. We got one person online that wanted to speak, and then we'll go back to the committee. Who do we have online there, Abby? Mr. Parsons, are you with us? Let's see. All right, here we go. Can you hear us, Mr. Parsons? Can you speak? We're going to try one more time for you, Mr. Parsons.
Hi,
can you
Chairman
hear me?
Collins.
Okay, there you go. Go ahead.
I thank Chairman Collins and members of the committee. I want to thank you for this opportunity to testify virtually in support of House Bill 925, and for thanks to Representative Sains for sponsoring the PRAISE Act. The COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent lockdown shuttered houses of worship across the country. Many houses of worship have yet to recover from these draconian policies, both in terms of weekly attendance and providing charitable support to its members and communities. Let us recall that in addition to weekly services, churches provide outreach to the homeless, counseling to marriages, programs for kids, and prayer for the sick. Yet during these same lockdowns, the government looked the other way for retail and entertainment corporations, many of which maintain the freedom to remain open and operate. Religious institutions face stark discrimination compared to other secular entities. This discrimination violated Americans' fundamental right to religious freedom. As noted earlier, Nevada had a rule where casinos could operate at 50%, but churches could only have 50 people, no matter the size. We cannot allow something like this to happen in Georgia or anywhere in the country. House Bill 925 ensures that houses of worship are treated in the same manner as other entities. The government cannot discriminate against or close a place of worship during an emergency when other businesses are open. It must treat all institutions equally. The ACLJ has been doing this work for nearly 40 years. You cannot treat religious groups differently solely because they are religious. Again, we support the PRAISE Act and we ask for prompt consideration for its passage. And thank you again for letting me testify virtually. And I'm happy to answer any questions if that's permitted. Or
Where are you from? What part of the state?
I am in Nashville, Tennessee right now. I did go to undergraduate university in Atlanta, but I'm in Nashville, Tennessee right now.
All right. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, and that's all of the public comments that we're going to have today. Chairman Darlene Taylor, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the chairman for bringing this bill. And as a former director of women's missions at First Baptist Church, where, by the way, we just celebrated our 175th anniversary of our church.
All right.
At the appropriate time, I asked for a due pass.
Okay, we got one more person that wishes to speak. Who's that on? Representative Neal, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the chair. So I did have a question about clarity. So lines 16 through 22. I know one of the pastors made a reference to it. I want to make sure it's clear because it sounds kind of vague. And the reference that was made was so long as any other secular establishments are closed. What I'm seeing here is saying that if any other, and let me see if I'm interpreting this correctly. If all other entities, to include churches, are encouraged to be closed by local government, that's one thing. But if certain businesses are allowed to be open and churches are forced to be closed, that's another thing. So my fear is, or if you can provide clarity, as long as it's either a closure for everybody or not, you can be sued or not. I think that's where I'm going. So it's like, I want to make sure that if the government says, okay, everything's closed, churches are not, that they can't be sued because everybody's closed. But if some entities are allowed to be open, but churches are forced to be closed, then you have a lawsuit under this bill. Is that correct?
Sure. So, and we appreciate the American Center for Law and Justice. They've helped model that legislation in many other states to make sure that there's not an unintentional liability there. But exactly as you mentioned, as Taylor noted, the most favored status is to ensure that if there are exemptions, if there's entities that are open, a church would, or institution of faith would automatically be within that. But if it's a unanimous closure of all business entities, that would be still allowable within this. This would not apply in those instances.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Representative Cummings.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. So would the businesses include gas stations and supermarkets and places like that where people have to go to get food or they can't do anything? Is that what we're talking about?
A lot of persons of faith would say that just like getting gas, that going to the institution of faith is not an optionary thing for them. It's just as equal to going and getting gas for your car. So that again would correlate a gas station to a church. If a gas station can be open in place of public use, an institution of faith would be as well. And just to quickly add and to clarify, I think the reason we're not one of the first states to do it is a reflection of Governor Kemp's leadership. This is not a legislative remedy in Georgia's legislative foresight, because we did handle this in partnership with our faith-based institutions.
Right. So one more. So if it's limited, would it also include, like I think with the stores, there wasn't the regular hours, there were certain hours. So would those limitations also apply to religious entities too?
Yes, ma'am. Essentially, it wouldn't apply to it's just recommendations or encouragements, but if there's anything that has force of law behind it, enacted at a local or state level that says these are the restrictions, and then gives an exemption, like let's say they say to retail establishments, you can have, instead of being fully closed, you can have up to 100 people. Then that exemption being given to that one entity would also apply to the religious context. And I want to highlight in answer to that as well, this really is just standard First Amendment protection that has long-standing precedent under Supreme Court history, because essentially what it's just recognizing is that this is a very fundamental aspect of each individual's public life as well as private life. And so it prevents there being a two-tiered system where churches are the ones, or other religious establishments are the ones who have to stay closed, and you see a variety of other exemptions popping up for different businesses. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Ridley.
Representative Neal's point earlier about all businesses being closed, I don't think there's a time in the state where every business would be closed, because if that was the case, I don't think we'd have a government much longer, because I think people want to eat and get gasoline.
You're exactly right. Okay, I'm going to recognize Representative Lott. She wanted to be recognized for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to pass on this legislation, please. LC 442521ER.
Okay, we're going to second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. Okay, it is unanimous. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, if we go through another situation where you got to be closed down, you might want to think about getting nail technicians or tanning beds in the Family Life Center, because that could bring in new people to the church. Okay, all right. All right. Yeah, thank y'all very much. The next bill that we're going to call is House Bill 424. Brother Ken Vance is going to represent that to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Again, I bring to you today a substitute to last year's House Bill 424 relating to the qualifications for the office of sheriff and supplements that sheriffs receive for serving in courts beyond Superior Court.
What LC you working off of there?
I am working off of, thank you, sir. I'm learning. LC 394119S, which you should have before you.
Everybody have that?
Okay, Section 1 does 5 things. It requires a person seeking to qualify as a candidate for the office of sheriff to be a certified peace officer by post, peace officer standards and training. Number 2, it requires that person to be in good standing with the post council, meaning they are without having been revoked or suspended within the last 5 years, and not under any sanction or medical disability retirement at the time of qualifying. That they are not drawing a disability retirement from any local, state, or federal retirement plan. I think that's a little bit redundant, but I said it twice. It allows individuals that are not certified peace officers to attend the basic mandate course prior to qualifying at their own expense. And from last year, we incorporated into this bill what was called the Mathis Amendment, that allows individuals that pay out of their pocket to become post-certified as a pre-service candidate to be reimbursed if they are elected. And those particular items for reimbursement are enumerated in the bill. Section 2 is a little bit different. It would increase the number of court supplements that the sheriff receives from 1 currently to 3, no more than 3. And they would receive $385.90 per court that they served. Most sheriff's departments serve all those courts in that county. And those particular courts are also enumerated in the bill. Section 3 would make the effective date of the Section 1 upon the signature of the governor. And section 2 would become effective July 1st. The reason for that being is, as y'all know, qualifying for the office of sheriff may occur in some counties prior to that July 1st date. So we're trying to get this done this year. And I will close by saying this, folks, it's time. We've been doing this before I got here as a legislator. I was head of post for 13 years. I understand the need for professional people to run for the highest constitutional office in the county. And it's time that we put this requirement into the law and get our best people for our highest constitutional county job. Thank you, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
All righty. Anybody want to speak at this time? Let's see, we've got Terry Norris for the Sheriff's Association and Mike Mitchell.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'll speak.
Go ahead.
Is this position okay?
It's a hot mic. Yes, sir.
It is so good to be in front of the best committee in the House or the Senate with the most insightful members.
Keep it coming, Terry.
It's good to see all of you. Thank you, Representative Vance, for bringing this up again. I started with the sheriffs in about 95. We've been working on this issue of certification at the time of qualification for a lot of years. One point of clarity is sheriffs already have to be certified. The main difference in this bill and the focus of this bill is to require that certification at qualification. In years past, that the current law was pretty effective. But in today's times, when in order to get certified, in order to attend the training, you have to do a couple of things first before you can even try the course. And that is, you have to pass a physical agility test, which is not that difficult. I'm 70, I think I can do it. And you have to pass a psychological. I'm not sure about that one.
It's debatable.
But failure to pass either one of those pre-tests excludes you from attending training. So if you don't get trained within 6 months of taking office under the current law, then post counsel is to notify the probate court in the county of which you had been elected and declare the office vacant, which would mean what? We'd have to have a special election for the office of sheriff. So the sheriffs have been for this proposition for a long, long time. And, you know, in the early years, it was always one of those things, and I'll go ahead and say it. This is an incumbent protection bill. It's not. It's not. You all know the scrutiny that all law enforcement are under, and sheriffs are no different. So we are happy to answer any questions about the other portions of the bill. But nonetheless, thank you for giving us a few minutes today. Happy to answer questions.
All right, I still got some questions here. Representative Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to the sponsor or to you, Mr. Norris, just can you remind me what, like if someone needs to take the training, how do they get, I'm trying to remember about compensation. Like, do they get compensated for the cost of the training if they bear that on their own before they become a candidate?
Or we'll let Representative Vance go for that.
It says, Representative Evans in section 4, that they can apply to go, and post will make a way for them to attend that training 6 months prior to qualifying as a pre-service candidate. Now, if you attend that basic law enforcement training, there will be some reimbursement for expenses. The cost of tuition, uniforms, and course equipment shall be paid by the office of the sheriff, for which if that person becomes elected. Those things are the ones that would be covered by the county if that person who got pre-qualified, pre-service qualified, became the elected sheriff.
Yeah, but if they're just a candidate and they lose, then they eat those costs. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Representative New. Representative New.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I just want to thank you for bringing this bill. It is very, very good. Thank you for ensuring quality leaders that will be, they will be securing our neighborhoods and making sure that they have the education they need before they take office. And at the appropriate time, Chairman, I would like to make a motion.
Okay.
Thank you,
A
sir.
couple more. We'll clear off the line here. Chairman Jaspers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, Terry, you made the comment that the probate judge is making a null and void election. Has that ever happened?
Not to my knowledge. What has happened is we have had, in my tenure with the Sheriff's Association, we've had 4 or 5 individuals who were not previously in law enforcement and were not certified and came on board and went through the current laws process. Within 6 months after they took office, they became certified. Back then, though, there was no pretest, and there was no, well, those pretests I spoke of. And at the time, it was the scrutiny over how we're trained, what we're trained, and actually the transparency that we try to offer was not there. So we were getting training back then. We were 50 out of 50 states back then, and we're 50 out of 50 states right now on overall basic mandate training. So there wasn't a lot of scrutiny. People could go that maybe had no experience and show up, but I don't ever remember the probate judge ever having to declare it vacant. Ken, I don't think it happened in your 13 years for sure.
I guess that's what I was asking. I mean, just to make sure clear that this hadn't happened. And I guess, so Ken, for you on it as Mr. Representative, excuse me, has anyone been elected by the citizens in their county and then not been able to be post-qualified by the appropriate time?
In my 13 years well, actually, I was on post council since 1994. But in those years, I do not recall one. I do recall some very close calls. So, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, that's my question, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. One thing that has changed though is the physical requirement. The physical.
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah.
That's in the last 4 or 5 years we've
So that's something that's new. You have to pass.
And the psychological, yes, sir.
And psychological. Okay. And with the rise of social media and the cell phone here, we get so much better qualified candidates now than we ever have.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Jasper, the point you're making is, has it happened before? And the current law also prescribes that process. If someone under the current law did not pass the certification, that probate court intervention at that time presently exists in the law.
Okay. Sure. Representative Holcomb.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask about this historical context in a different way, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't most candidates that are already fulfilling this to begin with? It's very few, if any, lay people that just stand up and run for sheriff, right?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
But the current law does not preclude them.
Correct.
Standing from law. I actually served under a sheriff who ran a Gulf station before getting elected and somehow making it through the academy.
That's interesting. Okay. I can only recollect one in DeKalb County. Person was completely unqualified and was not elected, but often we have multiple people in counties in the metro region that I'm familiar with experienced law enforcement people running for office. And I just raised that to your point of in terms of anywhere to view this as an anti-incumbency measure, it doesn't seem that that's borne out by what is taking place in elections, correct?
Correct.
All right, thanks.
Representative Neal.
Yes, sir. Thank you to the chair. I think my first question is, does this apply to officers who have to individuals who have their current certifications in an expired mode, such as they haven't been doing it for years, it's expired. 'Cause I know we were working with Post at one point, because in Post, it used to be where if you just, it was expired, you would consider bad standing, but it shouldn't have been that. So I know we worked to change that, so it just says expired. So those people can still run and just reactivate the certification, correct?
No, ma'am, it's not quite that simple. If you've been, the way my understanding is that it currently stands, if it is expired, you got to start over. You got to start over. Isn't that the way you understand it?
I don't
right.
I don't think that's.
You can go take a short course, if you will, and get back in, but
Well, so I'll jump in, so, because I had to do it.
I remember our conversations from past when I was at Post. But at that time, if you were out more than 3 years, your certification expired. And you would have to go back in front of Post to either allow them to reactivate it with or without conditions, or you had to start over. And I think we put those conditions in just so somebody that was out more than 3 years could come back under a much lesser training requirement.
So to my knowledge and what I fear is, I know there are a lot of good people trying to run for sheriff across the state now, and some of them, their certifications might be expired. And from what I know, presently you can fulfill the requirement for the yearly to reactivate.
You have to go back and make up that training that
Right.
you didn't have. And it may be, if it's 21 hours, 22 hours a year, and you've been out for 3 years, you got to make up 60 something hours. And once you made up those hours, that's those conditions I were talking about. Once you made up those hours, then you were reinstated.
So I think with this bill, you're going to unintentionally lose out on those candidates, because I don't think this bill speaks to that part of it.
My view is I've never heard the term of peace officer certification expiring.
So that's the thing. So we had to change this one, saying we had to change that. Because in the past, if you were expired, like you didn't do anything bad, you weren't in bad standing, you get fired.
You just got out.
You just got out. For some reason,
Right.
it was shown as a negative, and it should have never done
No,
that.
no, you're right about that. But what
Yeah.
I'm saying is, I think what Representative Vance is saying is if you go back and if you make up your in-service required hours,
Yeah.
then your certification, it's not that you've lost your certification.
No.
It's just sort of in limbo until you go back and catch up. I believe I'm correct about that.
That's correct.
Yeah, so I think this bill does not reflect that. And I think if this is going to be valid upon the signature of the governor for this election cycle, if, let's say if council can confirm, I think you run the risk of unintentionally losing out on some good people. So if I'm gonna sit here and look at it, but if I could provide a friendly amendment to make sure we capture those people, I would like to offer that. Go ahead.
We'll come back to you here in just a moment.
Go ahead.
Number 26 is going to be Representative Mathis.
Yeah, a quick question. We said that we added a couple of things, the physical part of the post certification and the mental. Okay, was that, you would still have to do that if you were post certified, but you had not, didn't go through that process. You'd still have to have that done, whether, if you'd been out of law enforcement for some period of time. If that's the way I understand it, the part that you added.
I'm not sure about that because you've already got your certification.
Yeah.
You're not going back to the mandate training. You've already been.
Yeah.
So those two pieces are prior to attending the mandate training.
Those two pieces,
Yes,
physically able and mentally able.
I don't think if you're speaking
Yeah.
of what Representative Neal's speaking of,
Yeah.
I don't think that's,
Well, the thing I'm saying too, if somebody been in there and they lost, they had not been in law enforcement, but they're gonna have to go through the physical and the mental capability part regardless.
No, they've already been certified.
no,
already
right.
been
That's
certified.
my
They've already been
thought.
certified.
I'm saying if they had been out of law enforcement and it expired.
It doesn't expire though. That's the thing. that we-
Well,
be
if
clear.
it doesn't expire, we doesn't
They-
preclude
they-
anybody.
That's correct.
Doesn't have a bearing.
if I may, Mr. Chairman, make a comment in reference to Ms. Neal's situation. If that person knows now today that they want to run for sheriff, they can go online and knock out 90% of those hours online. That's available to them because they do have a peace officer certification number. They have a number. They can go online, they put in their number, they can get all those hours of training. For the most, I'd say over 90% of those hours made up, or maybe 100% of those hours made up prior to qualification. So I don't see that as an impediment to what this bill is trying to do. They know as a peace officer and having to conform with those rules that they can make up those hours. And if they so desire to run for sheriff, then they can take the time in the evening or whenever after the job they have now to make up those hours and be certified at the time of qualification.
Representative Petrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think this was just cleared up with Representative Mathis's question, but I just want to be sure. So let's say that just because I support this measure, absolutely.
Yes.
But I want to make sure of something. So let's say there's someone who's been in law enforcement for many years. Now they're 75 years old. And I'm speaking to the physical piece. That's all new. And but this is someone who's most competent, most experienced, for all those executive functions, administrative functions, largely as a sheriff. But is there going to be any concern that someone like that, who would be perfectly capable, may not qualify because of some of these physical limitations that come with age or things of that nature? Just want to clarify that. I didn't quite understand.
Representative Petrie, if they were already certified as a law enforcement officer, let's be real clear about this. If they were already certified as a law enforcement officer, they don't have to go back and do the physical agility or the mental, the psychological test that they would if they were brand new, never been in law enforcement, never been certified, that they'd have the hoop they'd have to jump through to get to this point.
And Representative, if they had ever been certified, is that correct? To your point,
Correct.
not just
Not registered.
even if they had been
just
certified
gotta
at any
make up-
point in
make
their
up their-
career, because it might have been 20 years, but that they would still, that would not
As long as they
encumber
made up
their ability to run for sheriff.
As long as they made up their training hours.
Gotcha.
And became
Thank you,
current,
sir.
and
That's all.
became current.
Thank you.
Representative Neal, did you get what you needed to out of that?
Thank you to the chair. Yes, I'm trying to draft the recommended amendment. I really think, I support the bill. You all know that, but what I hate is for you to pass and be like, oh my God, we didn't think about that. And I really think that this bill is about to exclude a lot of really good potential candidates. So I'm trying to formulate a sentence. I'm close.
All right, number 23, that's going to be Representative
That'd be
Clint Crowe.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So while Representative Neal's working on her draft over there, so if I understand you correctly, let's say hypothetically, I haven't been active since December 31st, 2017, according to my post stuff. Would I have to have 20 hours for each of those years for 7 years, 140 hours to be back in good standing? Or would it just be if I went back to work this year, I'd have to have 20 hours use of force, community policing, and de-escalation now, I think is required, right?
I think the answer, well, I'm sure the answer to that is you appeal to the post council and they would tell you how many hours you would have to make up. It may be, they may say 140 hours, which is a crowd, but they may say you have to take these courses in order, and this many hours in order to become current.
Okay. My understanding was as long as you had all your current hours the last year that you worked and you were good then, that you just kind of went dormant and you were good until you started back again. That was my understanding. And if I had that wrong, then that's good to know.
No, so that's accurate. So when I had to get mine back, I just had, even though it was dormant, I just had to do the hours for the year, pay the recertification, the fee, and then I'm back. Yeah.
Okay. Here's what we're going to do. Any more questions at this time? Yeah, Chair Terry, go ahead.
I just want to say, I think if we look at the language about what good standing is, and you consider that once you're certified, even if you're inactive, you're still in good standing. unlike what Representative Neal was alluding to in prior years. So you're not in bad standing. Your certification is fine. You may not have got your 20 hours, including your 5 or 6 hours of governor's mandate training that we all have to get now.
Right.
But you're not in bad standing. You're in good standing. So my recollection of what the language in the bill says, the affidavit that is to be signed by the executive director of post would likely say, yes, they're in good standing. You do have a certification, but at some point you have to go back and get the in-service. Now, how do you make up hours? If I don't get my 20 hours this year at the end of the year, I can petition post for a waiver of my 20 of whatever portion of my 20 hours I didn't get the previous year. And generally speaking, they frequently grant requests for waivers. So again, I don't think the fact that you don't have your in-service training, but yet you do have your mandate and it's otherwise in good, you haven't been revoked, you're not on suspension or probation, I think you're going to be fine. But I welcome any kind of change and make that better.
Okay. Representative Crowe had another comment.
Yeah, just to highlight that point. So I logged in to the post council and it says here status in good standing. And I haven't been active in just over 6 years.
Right.
And so it does say specifically status in good standing. And I think that's the language in this bill. So I know the person you're talking about, and I think their status should be in good standing as well. I don't know if we need to admit that.
So let's go to Representative Mathis.
Yeah, just I'm trying to get in my mind too. If someone needed some extra credit, to get back, I mean, couldn't they do the same thing as somebody that had to be post certified? They could do it prior to the election, just the same
Yes,
way. So
sure.
that ends it.
And I'll say about the 20-hour in-service mandate annually, a lot of that can be done online. You don't have to go sit in a classroom on a lot of this stuff.
Okay. Representative Neal.
I'll read it out if you like it.
Okay. We're not going to vote this bill today because if there's some changes that need to be made, we've sent this to rules and it's got kicked back several times.
Okay.
So I'm going to give the author of the bill an opportunity to get with you and figure out exactly what we need to do, because I want this thing to be clean and neat and packaged up before it comes out of this committee. So is there any other questions for the author of the bill or for Mr. Terry Norris here? Okay. There being no further business before this committee, we are adjourned.
Thank y'all. Appreciate it.